welcome to the Canadian Forces School of Military Engineering. We're here in the Canadian Military Engineers Museum, and we have guests from the Beaverbrook Gallery. We have Troy Haynes and John
Leroux, yeah.
And we're going to talk about artwork. Our collections are predominantly things like uniforms, documents, equipment, vehicles, and weaponry, and we often don't realize how much artwork we really do have in our collections. Even if you get into things like technical drawings, you're going to find that you need a bit of knowledge about artwork to be able to identify exactly what they are, so you know what your storage conditions need to be and things like that. And that's where experts in the field are so useful. So as we were walking in, we were talking about the paintings I have in the hallways, and we have a lot of different media that a lot of people just walk by and then say, plaque, 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 picture, plaque. So really, there's more to our collections than we sometimes think.
Absolutely. It's one of the things we noticed coming in, even the memorial plaque is on the side. You have an enormous bronze plaque from World War I, which was done by a really important Canadian sculptor named Henri Hébert, who's done a lot of cenotaphs and large bronze sculptures. He's in the National Gallery. So works are by people that even beyond the kind of recognition of the military history have done great things in Canadian art. And but with the works on paper, there's absolutely some striking things. We even passed a war poster from World War II, which I know was hung simply for its fact of what it was as a war poster. But it was done by a major Canadian artist named York Wilson, who again is of national importance beyond that. And so yeah, there's some important pieces that have a story beyond simply the military history as well.
Okay, so why don't we get started looking at documents. So this is one of a pair of drawings that was done by a First World War soldier. This is his wife that he did a little bit before the accompanying portrait, which was himself in uniform. So I haven't really taken a close look at this to figure out what the medium actually is.
Yeah, looking very close, it's a remarkable pencil on paper, and you can tell here, especially with the white highlights, that it's oftentimes you'll have a kind of a medium cream piece of paper, and you have the black to draw out the forms, but then white to give some highlights as well. You see here with the jewelry and ears, and certainly with the plant forms around. But this is it's an absolutely remarkable work, pencil and colored pencil on paper, and you can see where it's been framed, and it's had a little bit of sun bleaching over the years, but it's still in quite remarkably good condition without, there's a little bit of a tear here. You have to be very careful rolling these out because the tear can certainly increase if it wasn't done carefully. But this could certainly use an acid bath because it would not be acid-free paper, and just to keep it kind of a bit more inert so it won't yellow and damage more over time. But as a pencil on paper, it's a remarkable piece. It looks a lot like a lithograph, but you can tell it's not by the intimate details.
When I first looked at it, when I saw this white and that intense white and the dark blacks, I thought maybe it was a pastel. But then I noticed where it rolled up, it hadn't transferred.
Yes.
And sometimes you see that.
Yeah, it's simply too fine. It would have almost sort of pastel-like. Sort of, we call them pencil crayons, that kind of thing. And you can even see here the paper mill mark. But there's a little bit of foxing on this as well. So it's not quite so much mold, but just sort of age spots. But it definitely needs a little bit of conservation. But it's a great piece. The other thing too is when things are rolled like this, they need to be flattened, but done very carefully over time.
Yeah, we have this one earmarked for more conservation.
Okay.
It arrived to us in an Eaton's wax paper box.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So.
I think you should try to just walk in.
So this was done at the end of the Second World War to document 10th Field Squadron's activities in the war, and this is one of a set of prints that were distributed to all the members of the unit. but I don't know what kind of print that is. Is there any way to tell?
Looking at the front of this, sometimes you'll see whether there's additions. It's not sort of an art print, as you say. This would have been. This is really well done, where it's an offset print, and you can see there's metallic inks there, Troy. Herb's Vending, and there's Holland. Right under there, that's the print. So there's the artist here, Louis Saint-Denis from Ottawa, but this would have been printed in Holland. So you can see lith right there, that means lithograph, and that's the studio. It was done by Van Dingen in Holland, so that this was still done in Europe when this would have been very fresh.
Yeah.
Printed by a master printer in Holland.
Yeah.
It's
So it's a lithograph. Is there anything particular besides something saying, like a studio saying lithograph, where you can recognize a lithograph from other types of print?
The thing, a lithograph's actually done with a lithograph stone. It's a print. Sometimes there's metal prints on copper sheets as sort of etchings, but with the litho was a stone, very high quality. It sort of depends. Sometimes something like the one here below would be a lithograph, because it's not simply sort of it's linear, where the inks really quite bleed into each other, and sometimes you get this sort of press line around, which is actually the line of the lithograph stone as it pushed against it.
And in the corners, you can tell it's a lithograph too, because usually it's rounded, whereas if it's a metal plate, it's usually square.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah. With the litho stone, they actually do the litho print, and then they wear it down and use it again. So some litho stones have been used hundreds of times, and they're still sort of thick. But with that one, as a lithograph, and again, usually for this, look in if there's a print, we can tell it's not original. One way to tell, I often have times where people think it's an original pencil drawing or watercolor, and you can tell it's not, because it's just so even. Even with a watercolor pencil, even though it's not necessarily thick, you can tell whether there's sort of a sheen. There's sort of a difference along. This is wonderful, but it's quite uniform. So it's definitely, you can just sort of tell. But the printer is usually down in one of the lower corners, so you can see painted by William Langstroth, and there's his name. But if it's on there in kind of mechanical lettering, it's obviously a print.
Yeah.
For this one of the Vimy monument. But that's as a litho, to get that level of detail.
Okay. Now what we have here are more documents that are working documents, especially for the engineers, different technical drawings.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm actually an architect too. My background is architecture, so I have a real affinity for architectural drawings. And this is one, just as a bit of an aside, oftentimes drawings like this, they're not works of art per se, but they have an enormous intrinsic value as works of art, certainly if they're from the 19th century, early 20th, because it's that sort of technical and artistic hand, which you don't see in architectural drawings today, but they're often, with the lettering and watercolor rendering, they were done with much more of an artistic consideration than just simply a technical document, and this one especially. And this one, they were often done on linen, so people would really take their time with some linen. But with this one, this one is actually, there you can see the piece on there. This is on. This is on paper within.
It looks like it's it's got a weave, but it's like very heavily covered with something else.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, one of the things here, this has actually been sandwiched. You know, we often as kids we'd sandwich things in plastic to preserve it. That's one of the worst things you can do for works on paper, because the glue comes and it can yellow, and it basically puts glues on it, which isn't good. But this one, I believe this is just a really, I think this is just a really tight weave. This is really tight linen. Let me see, I'm actually going to feel it, because then you can sort of feel it.
Yeah, it seems to be the same type of thing that release certificates of service were printed on.
Yes.
And they get folded up in someone's wallet for years, and then all you see is the weaving on where the paper is broken.
Yeah, absolutely. Now this one, they would often do sort of, we'll get to the blueprints in a bit, but when it's positive like this, that looks like the original. This is all the original piece. But again, a big thing for these is keeping them flat, keeping them out of the light. But for architectural drawings, they didn't use sort of paper, certainly not vellum. Vellum would have been after, probably starting about the 1940s, 1950s, or with paper. But this is
another one. This one looks like it was printed on somehow.
yeah. This is what's the term for this? This
Pirates.
is yeah. We used to use this print in school. Yeah, maybe this could be cut just for a second while I think about that.
So framed and larger items, harder items, we have a lot of art in our collection, and it's all over the place in terms of what the media is. This one here is very interesting to me because it's just so odd. It's a sheet of plywood.
Yeah, it is. You would call this oil on board.
Yeah.
Is what it is. It's definitely oil paint because it was done sort of in the 40s or sometime like that. But it's been heavily varnished. You can see the varnish lines that are on here. So whether it needs restoration or not depends. I probably would sort of leave it, but it's quite a wonderful piece. It has the old, the engineering structures, the water tanks, the old trucks, and the soldiers at the edge of the water, but it's in good shape. Sometimes the tendency to this, people think they have to frame it, but I would actually show these if it's fairly stable. You can actually have kind of quite aesthetically pleasing hanging nails, and you can actually just sort of, you don't never nail it through it, but top and bottom, and hold it simply to the wall, and let the sheet be the sheet. You save a lot of money, and you eliminate glare and glass, and also sometimes this has a little bit of a texture to it as well.
Yeah.
So you could show this directly on the wall, but it's a wonderful piece. This is a pencil crayon on paper, and the big thing with these, any works on paper, is you definitely want to keep them out of direct natural light or sunlight, because it'll kill the work, it'll fade them, and deteriorate the paper. So even if a lot of people, you'll have them on a wall where it's bright and it gets direct sunlight even for 10-20 minutes as it goes through. That's absolute no. Never have these works on paper or photographs where they get natural light. But this is pencil crayon, and it's remarkable. And it's behind glass, and you can get UV glass that can help preserve it as well. But yeah, you can just see the hand of the pencil crayon. It's beautiful pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of this artwork is exhibited in a hallway. There is UV shields in the fluorescent lights.
Yeah, fluorescent lights are not good for paper. So there's better ones. Now they're switching to LED lights. LED is much better as well. We're looking at this earlier on. This is a fascinating piece. It's actually, you tend to call it a watercolor on paper, but there's actually sort of three mediums. There's pencil. You can see the artist's original sort of rough pencil lines around the mountains. There'd be some under this. Then he would have watercolored on top of it. And then with these white highlights here, that's actually called gouache. So it's sort of in a watercolor too, but it's a bit more opaque to get the highlights. So there's actually sort of three mediums in a sense, but you would call it a watercolor on paper. And it's good to see it's the acid-free matte with the white, because if you ever see mattes that are kind of brown, orange, or gold on the side where it's chamfered, you want to get rid of those because that's doing damage to your paper.
Yeah, and when we've reframed things, we've seen where there's been like an acid transfer at the edges. So.
Yeah, and sometimes the new acid, you can kind of bring the matte in just a little bit if you can.
Yeah.
This is, you're wondering what type this was. This is a mechanical reproduction. It's basically an offset print. You can tell the artist sometimes in the bottom corner if you have a number. This has a number 157/250. That means the artist did 250 of these, and this is 157th. So there's a lot of these out there, and then they would have, it's from a painting, and then the artist sort of did a print on there. But it's a mechanical print at a print shop, fairly recent and modern.
Yeah, I believe this one was presented to the school in 1985.
Okay.
So it's quite recent.
Yeah.
This one from 2003. Sometimes I look at this and I think it's watercolor, and sometimes I think it's markers. Like those Pantone markers that they use.
Yeah, sometimes it's both. And looking at this, I think it's both. You can definitely see here in the gray where there's the Pantone markers. You can see where the light gray and then the dark one sort of bleeding into one another. But here with the clouds, that is 100% not marker, where there's probably a bit of, whether it's some kind of form of
of watercolor. There may be some colored pencil. So you would call this multimedia. So if you use
Okay.
marker, certainly marker, pencil, and watercolor, where it's multiple things to get that effect of the clouds. Yeah. So, but there's definitely some marker and other things that are not marker in this.
Okay.
And again, keep them under the direct light. There's some beautiful, beautiful pieces here. The Vimy piece.
Baron's father, he was a cartoonist in the 1920s. And we know that this one was done in about 1945, 1946, when he was visiting Chilliwack, the army camp there.
Oh, this is in honor of Vimy.
Yeah.
Okay. The hand. This is a remarkable drawing. I mean, you can tell the skill of the artist. This looks like it was probably done, and I mean this as a compliment. This was probably done in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, and
someone
they
who's
were
so
just
good
quick
that they could just do it.
sketches.
Absolutely. And with this, so this is charcoal on paper, and you can see some white highlights. So whenever you see some white highlights here, the paper can fade. This was probably never white. It was probably some sort of kind of cream, almost sort of shopping bag brown. And then there's the black and then the white highlights here of his strap around here and a little bit on the cheekbones. But this is a wonderful piece and with a great signature. So you can see there's been a little bit of wear here, but where it's faded, works really well. I would maybe do something just with the red, because the red highlights kind of take your eye up a bit. But this is a wonderful piece, and it's actually framed really nicely. A nice, very simple frame with the backing. Yeah.
Now, what about this? This one is obviously an art print of some sort. We can move it on
Yeah.
to the table.
This is a lithograph. You can tell the lithograph with the rounded corner and just that real subtle gradation, which you never would get with an etching, with a metal plate etching. So that is a lithograph. The original would have been done on a stone and then transferred to a stone. And then here you can see these normally weren't done. Sometimes in editions, this may have been what's called a monoprint, where they would only do one, but there may have been several. So the artist's name is down here, as opposed to reproduction of a painting. But it has a sort of watercolor look to it, but it's because the litho, it is kind of liquid to a point. But this is a wonderful piece. Those highlights. It looks. I'm not sure. It looks like equal, but obviously it's a World War I battle
I
scene.
believe it is around Ypres.
Okay, yeah, because it reminds me of the cathedral, but this is in wonderful condition. This is, you get those sort of subtle gradations of the sky. So lithograph was done on a lithograph stone, and they would do it with labels or artworks.
Okay. Now, what about something like this? This one is 1945.
Yeah, that is an oil paint, and that is on. I'm actually going to lift this up in the back.
That's its original framing too.
Yeah, this would be oil on. This is basically called canvas board.
Okay.
So you can still buy these. These are quite common. They're very thin. It's sort of like a cardboard base, but it's actually faced with canvas. It's wrapped around. The artists use these all the time. So it's oil on canvas board. And yeah, from 1945. This is actually in really good condition. And yeah, with the frame, it looks like probably an older frame. So that's some, sort of building a bridge.
I believe that's at Chilliwack.
Yeah,
As well.
that's even the composition. That's a great painting.
It is.
So
And I
you're
know-
lucky with John W. Davies. Now with the internet, it'd be easy to research
We do
John
know that he
Davies.
was an engineer.
Okay.
I think he was a major, but don't quote me on that. Because we do have a lot of John Davies's works.
Well, whoever John Davies was, John Davies knew how to paint even the reflections in the water. I'm looking here at the back. So the nails are on there. Oh yeah, and actually, here's the thing as well. Often look on the back of works. It's super rich. What you'll find is this. Not so much if it's post-it note, or that's recent. But this is Canadian Army Art Competition, 1945. This is actually had that every year. That's what Bruno Bobak won in 1944. And so this was 4 soldiers who were not, artists that would have within the army ranks themselves. And so he went into this catalog number, Canadian Sappers. So this is wonderful. So this is an official sort of army document that Mr. Davies would have entered this into a competition. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the
never remove anything like this on the back. I
No.
mean, this is really significant information. Yeah, and sometimes you see things on the frame. You look around at the frame, property of CMC Museum, but sometimes there's other things that are around here that
Yeah.
can be quite interesting.
Yeah, I'll take that out of the way.
So yeah, I was admiring. We were talking about these shields that are through your hallways
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now.
And they were all produced 1945, 1946 in Europe while the units were waiting to come home. And there's supposed to be 2 copies for every RCE unit that served overseas. They were ordered to document their contribution to the war. 1 copy went to the engineering school in Chilliwack and 1 to Ottawa. But intervening years, there were fires at both facilities. We only have 1 of most of them.
Okay, you gradually lose some. Yeah, I mean this one is really. First thing I would always do is look in the back. Sometimes, okay, is there a signature? No. Sometimes there's signatures. Sometimes for this thing in the military, the people would sort of do it and not sign it because it's for the greater cause.
Yeah.
But this one is remarkable. You can see there's a varnish on them. Some of the ones I've seen you have really yellowed over
Yes.
time. If they've really yellowed, it may be worth removing the varnish. I wouldn't do it for this because the color is still very vibrant and bright. But if it prevents you from really enjoying the intent of the artist, you can remove the varnish. Buy a professional. Don't buy a bunch of varnish remover. There are art restoration professionals, but yeah, this was certainly a trained graphic artist. In the 1940s, there were a lot of trained graphic artists. You wouldn't simply know how to learn how to use softwares today, but you would have to be a really solid fine artist, and they would be soldiers. And so this is someone 100% with fine art graphics training. You were trained to be sign painters in the 30s.
Yeah.
This was probably someone with sign advertising training.
And we did have sign painters in the engineers in the companies.
Of course, doing
Yeah.
signs, yeah, absolutely. So that's a
So all
fascinating
of
story
those-
too. Someone should do something about the artists that were in the engineers, because of course, if you had to be graphically capable to do the blueprints, to do signage, regimental crests, all of these things. There was a part. Yeah, it's a fascinating story.
It's funny, there are a lot of amateur artists in the engineering branch even today.
Even today, okay,
Yes.
that's
Yep.
good.
This last one is very interesting to me.
What's on copper?
It's copper. Now, we have it cataloged as being poissonné.
Yes, it's a type of jewelry process where there's enamel on the copper.
Oh, like they would do, like for an order of St. Michael and St. George medal.
Yeah, absolutely, and then it's actually baked on, so it's not simply painted. It would be run through. Would they kiln that, Troy? The cloisonne?
I think a lot of times, I remember them doing it in school, and I think even in the oven would get it up to the right temperature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so obviously it's sort of cut out and drafted, so you can see the sheen. But this is beautifully done. Do you know the date on this?
I think they were made in the 1960s, maybe more recently. No, there's a signature. I think it was more recent than 1980.
Okay.
Might have been the 1980s even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, beautifully done, and I think this you'd never, obviously, just any sort of cleaning on this, you just sort of dust it off, or just a light fat. Oh, look, that's actually multiple pieces where it's cut through. So
yeah.
so each so there's
Each
actually
element.
there's actually 5 pieces. That's the middle. The middle is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I guess they baked them at different times. Yeah. No, it's wonderful with the frame, and the frame of this is also is something which is really strong. That is definitely an integral part of the piece. You never
Yeah.
want to remove that the frame was intended as being part of the whole.
Yeah, this is part of a set of 4, documenting some of the earlier badges of the Ordnance Corps and the
Yeah.
Royal Engineers.
Well, I think with all this, and there's even other things, for example, like books, which are, they're 3-dimensional objects, but it's essentially a series of sheets, how those are displayed. One of the things is if you have books or anything that's bound, is to not have it laid flat, because then you'll break the spine. There's things you can get that sort of folded at
Yeah.
a slight angle.
Yeah, there's
Make
a,
it gentle, as
there's a
you've got
cradle
there.
behind that one.
Yeah, but I think with all of these, you have a wonderful collection here. So I think the whole series, and we've talked about probably 14 different mediums,
Yeah.
different styles, whether it's
are small lithos, drawings, metalwork, watercolors, oils, and they all have slightly different treatments. But I think all together, the big thing is be gentle with them, and just do some very simple research, which you can certainly find online, or asking a professional on how they're to be handled. But I think they really bring out and they flesh out so much of this museum, as opposed to simply the three-dimensional kind of military hardware.
Yeah.
As part of the history.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have something like this, these big pieces.
Yeah.
They're the cornerstone of this gallery. I know for many, many years when we were in Chilliwack, they were actually just the backgrounds of the history that was being told in front of them, whereas here we wanted them to be seen more as artworks.
Yeah, and this is, Orville Fisher. That's the thing as well. This is an important Canadian artist. Orville Fisher sort of first half of the 20th century was a really renowned Canadian artist, had national renown. And these have had some restoration done, and even having a little bit of wear, that kind of patina of age is okay because they've lived a life. But these are wonderful works. They're really, really strong works.
These ones have had a very rough life. They've been cut down at least twice. They were folded at various parts.
Sure.
They've had graffiti written on them. The fact that they're still in this type of condition is quite...
Graffiti probably by some visiting
Some
foreign
of it-
soldiers.
Exactly, yeah.
Not Canadians. They wouldn't have done it.
But yeah, we did find some very interesting graffiti on it when we had the restoration done about 10 years ago.
Yeah. But they make a wonderful sort of backdrop for this as well, because you can see they have the surveying transits in there, the other equipment to have with these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're such a great way of telling a story. We get students who are interested in art, we talk about them as artworks, we get the history students, we talk about the uniforms, how we were using civilian work groups to supplement labor.
Yeah.
There's just
Well,
so much information, even if they're not like 100% documentary photographic proof.
Sure.
It's a really wonderful way. You can see how somebody else was seeing that era.
Yeah, they're almost sort of as emotional as they're sort of factual. One of the neat things about this too is seeing how the narrative was portrayed, because these were done in the early 1940s.
Yes.
How did they portray this sort of heroism of these people compared to how you would do it today?
Yeah.
And things are also very, very sort of different. There's very, the kind of strength of the veil and all these kinds of things, which in some ways was certainly present. But it's interesting how people thought of these historic events in the 1940s versus how we think of them today. So fascinating in that way, that these, it's representing a historical event, but these are historical documents of themselves.
Yeah, these are the last paintings that they, Fisher and Goranson did before they became soldiers and then got into the war art program.
Yeah.
So it really even documents how the Second World War progressed.
Absolutely.
From an art point of view.
Yeah, yeah. And even, the typography of the lettering down below is perfect. So you can see how artists were trained in lettering often at the time too, which they're really not now. It's different. This is great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, and take care of your artworks up there.
Yeah. Now, Troy, again, has moved behind the camera now, but thank you to you, Troy. And thank you, John. We really appreciate you coming in. We're hoping that the OMMC will be in New Brunswick next year, and we are so much looking forward to coming to see your museum.
Oh, absolutely. Anything we can do to help. We'd love to welcome the rest of Canada.
It's wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And remember, on Wednesday evening, if you have any questions, we'll be able to answer questions in the live Zoom section then. Thank you.